project. So we are traveling to one of two places. We're doing cherry blossoms. And so you can find cherry blossoms in Japan. They have a big cherry blossom festival, I believe, every year. And then you can also do the same thing in Washington, D.C., which is where the cherry blossom trees came from, was Japan. So pretty cool. So you can see those in two different places. And other places too, but that's where the cherry blossoms are the most famous. So we're going to be doing a cherry blossom branch today. So let me show you my space here and we'll get started. All right, so as far as supplies, I am using cold press paper, and this is a block. So that means that all the pages are kind of sealed together and stuck, so it'll stay nice and flat. If you don't have a block, then what you should do is tape it down with painter's tape all around on, I like to use foam board. So anything flat that you can tape the paper down will be very helpful, because we're going to be doing a big background and using quite a bit of water. And whenever that's the case, then it's very helpful to tape down your work. Okay, so let's get started. Oh, and my brushes. I'm using a flat 3/4 inch brush for the background. You use the biggest brush that you have. And I am also going to be using a round brush. This is a size 10. Okay, so if you have a smaller piece of paper though, you can use a smaller brush. I'm using, for me, fairly big brushes because I'm using the whole piece of paper. Okay, makes sense? All right, so let's get started. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put water all over my paper. And I apologize, I have some splatters left over from something I was just doing, and I'm like, oh, I really don't want to not use this paper, so we're just going to keep it. In fact, we're going to be adding some more splatters anyway, so it doesn't really matter. They'll blend right in. So I'm going to wet my paper all over. And the background we're doing is going to be really subtle, so I am excited to show you. Okay, that should be enough. Okay, so for the background, I find it, when I'm doing a wash, I find it easier to start from the top. So I'm going to show you what I'm going to do, and then I'll show you a little trick here. Okay, so for my wash here, I'm going to be using Payne's Gray. And like I said, I want this wash on the background to be very subtle, okay? Kind of understated. So I'm just going to pick up a little bit of the Payne's Gray. And I'm going to pick up my paper a little bit and tilt it. That is always helpful when you're doing a wash. And really, that's really the only time I tilt my paper usually. Some people always work in their watercolor with their work slanted. I don't care for that for some reason. All right, so I'm taking my Payne's Gray, a very light mix, and I'm just going to start bringing that down my paper, keeping it as smooth as I can. Okay, now here's the deal. I want this to fade. I only want like the top half or third of my paper to be in the Payne's Gray color. Okay, so when it starts to kind of run out, then you can always grab some water and just kind of start going back down the paper. So by the time you get about halfway and lower, there it will just be basically white paper. Okay. Okay. So now, in my mind, I want the wash to be on the bottom of my page. So I'm just going to flip my paper. Okay. So you can do whatever you want. If you want your wash to be at the top, that's fine. I have it in my, like I said, I have it in my brain. I want it on the bottom. So I'm going to flip my paper. All right, so now while this is still a little bit wet, what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a pink, okay? And it does not matter what pink you have. But what I want you to do is I'm mixing a fairly pale puddle of my pink. Okay, so a real light mix. And I'm just going to pick up my brush with the pink paint on it, and I'm going to start dabbing in little spots of pink. Just here and there, okay? Some spots will be bigger than others, and that's okay. Some spots will be wetter than others, and so they'll spread, and that's okay too. So don't feel like they all have to look uniform. In fact, I think it looks more interesting when they all do look a little different. You can add in really as much as you want. And you can even do it down here on the part that was the Payne's Gray. Okay. All right, there we go. So now we need to let this background completely dry. Okay, now that our paper is completely dry, we need to start putting in our branch, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get my round brush, and I'm going to be using just a brown, okay? Use whatever brown you have. So if you don't have a brown, what you can do is mix together complementary colors. So for instance, you can do red and green you can mix together to make a brown. You can mix together orange and blue together to make a brown. And you can also mix together purple and yellow. So if you have any of those colors, put them together and you can make a brown, okay? I have a brown that I'm using. It's called Van Dyke Brown. But I always think of Dick Van Dyke. I can't help but think of Dick Van Dyke when I paint with this color. It makes me happy. All right, so I'm going to load up my brush with the brown, and I'm going to start down here in the bottom left-hand corner, okay? And so what I want to do is I'm going to start with more pressure down here than by the time I get to the top, because I want the bottom of my branch to be fatter than the top of my branch, okay? So I'm going to push down with my round brush and just kind of start giving it a branch shape, okay? And you can even go back in with more brown, and we're going to be adding more color to this, but if you feel like you kind of ran out of paint and you want your brown to be a little, or your branch to be a little bit darker, you can totally go back over it. Okay. Now, what we want to do is add in our little like twigs, okay? So I'm going to basically just pick wherever, put the point of my brush down, and then pull kind of in a wiggly fashion a line, okay? Because that branch, most branches are not super straight, okay? So that's the kind of the look we're going for here. So here, let's put in another one. So pushing down, and then as I get to the top of my branch, I'm kind of lifting my brush to make the top a little bit skinnier, okay? Here we go. And basically you can just put in as many as you like. They can be longer, they can be super crooked, they can be straighter, it's all up to you. Okay, here we go. And so now what I want to do is kind of start from this branch and add another one kind of coming over, okay? And you don't have to, but I got plenty of room on my page here, so I'm going to do that. So I'm going to start exactly where my other branch was, but next to it a little bit, because I want the bottom to be a little bit fatter. And then put in my branch. And then I can add in some more. Okay, there you go. Nice. All right, so now we get to put in our blossoms, okay? So cherry blossoms are a very light pink, okay? So a light pink is what we're striving for. So I find that it's very, especially when I'm wanting a very light mix of paint, putting it on a palette of some kind is very helpful because you have a lot more control over your water to paint ratio, okay? So on my palette, I'm mixing a very light mixture of pink, okay? And you might even go to where you're like, I think it's too light, and that's okay. It's honestly easier to add paint, another layer of paint to make it darker than to take paint away. So if you're going to err on the side of something, you want to err on the side of a lighter mix versus a darker mix, okay? So I'm going to pick up some of that light pink with my brush and basically pick a branch, and we're going to start putting in our cherry blossoms. So the way I like to do these, they kind of have, I think, like 4 petals. So I'm going to go in and go 1, 2, 3, 4 in a very loose fashion, okay? So 4 kind of dots that are all stuck together, okay? So like that, all right? Very loose. Okay, and you can go crazy with however many blossoms you like. Okay, so now I will recommend don't put them on the brown because they're not going to cover up the brown. The brown's going to shine through. So I've done this one a few different ways, and I find the ones that I didn't put the blossoms on the branches looked a little bit better to me. But you can try it out a couple different ways if you like. Okay, so let's keep going with and they don't have to be touching the branch. These are just, this is a loose design today, which is really fun. Okay, and don't feel like you have to put them all really close together because we are going to go back in and do another layer of these. So that will be super pretty. So I'm kind of spacing them out a little bit. Okay, let's stop there and let this dry, okay? So let this dry, and then we're gonna go back in and add some more really fun details. Okay, let's add a little bit of detail to our branch, and then we'll go back in and add some more blossoms here in a second, all right? So I'm going to grab that same brown, and with my round brush, with the tippy tip of my brush, what I'm going to do is add a little bit of like shading, okay? And the way we're going to do that is we're going to think about where the sun would be shining. The sun would be shining from the top down. And so the underneath part of the branch would probably be a little bit shaded, especially since it's round. The underneath side is going to be a little darker than the sun shining on top. So what I'm going to do is underneath each branch, I'm going to put a little line of the brown, and it's just layering on top. Here, let me show you. It's just layering on top, so it'll naturally be darker when it dries, okay? So you're just adding on one more layer of the brown, which makes it a little bit darker. So let's do all the undersides of these branches. Okay, and they can be a little bit wiggly, just like the branch's first layer was. Okay, and some of those might be a little bit thinner than others too. So you might need to really do light pressure on your brush to get kind of a smaller line. Okay, really just using the tippy tip of my brush, okay? All right, so now let's go back under here and get the big stem of our branch. Okay. Okay. Easy peasy. There we go. See, you can see just, it looks like a little bit of shading. So much fun. Okay, so now let's go back in and add another layer of our little flowers. So try and make sure your mix is just as light as your first mix, okay? All right, so now we're just gonna be doing the same thing with our flowers. Some of these will overlap, okay? And some of these will stand out on their own, okay? So if they're going to overlap, there we go. It's gonna, when it dries, you'll see the layers, okay? So let me get some of these down. Like I said, some of these will be on their own. Some of them will be overlapped. It's totally up to you. It's so pretty, combining like that blurred pink background and then the first layer and the second layer. I love layering. Love layering with watercolor. Something that's very unique to watercolor, and you can't do it with acrylic or oil, really. Something very unique about watercolor. Okay, you don't have to have a ton of these second blossoms. Just however many you like. Sometimes I kind of like to stop and look and see, like, do I have a kind of a bare spot somewhere or a hole. Okay, there we go. I'll do one more. One more for good measure. How about that? They're so much fun. All right, so let's let this dry, and then we're going to do the very last few details. All right, I'm loving this. See how the 2 layers of the pink show up? Isn't that so cool? I love it. Okay, so now this is where you get to decide what kind of details you want. You could just leave this, totally fine. You could also come in and add a little bit of like centers of your blossoms. Honestly, I kind of like the way it looks just on its own. But one detail one really cool way to kind of finish up a painting sometimes is to add a little bit of splatter. So let's do that. Let me show you. So I'm just going to get my regular round brush here. I'm going to grab, I think I'm going to grab some blue. You could grab the pink again, the brown again, the Payne's gray. I'm going to add some blue to kind of make those pink blossoms pop a little bit. And get a little bit of paint here. I'm going to be using Prussian blue. Okay, so I want to put paint on my brush. Okay, and I don't want it so much so that if I hold it upside down, it's going to drip. But this has plenty of paint on it. Now, what you're going to do is hold your brush horizontal to your paper. Okay, and what you're going to do is take the end of another brush and tap lightly from kind of a distance up high a little bit to start with and the blue is going to splatter down. Now, if it lands on your blossoms or your branch, that's okay. Okay, if you're really worried about only limiting the splatter to the background, as long as this is all dry, you can cover it up with some painter's tape, or just kind of take some paper and cover those spaces you want to preserve. But personally, I kind of like the way it looks when splatter kind of goes everywhere. Okay, so here we go. I'm just going to tap, tap, tap. I love adding splatter, and it kind of makes a little bit of a mess, so make sure you're wearing something that you don't mind getting paint on, possibly. Cool, okay. And if you hold it closer down, generally your splatters are a little bit bigger than if you hold it a little bit higher. Okay, so there you go. Fun, fun, fun. It's hard to know when to stop. We'll stop there though. All right, guys, so let's see here. Let's show you our finished product. And like I said, you can come in and add some pen details if you like. I kind of like the subtle, like soft look though. You know I love my pen details, but sometimes they're just not necessary, you know? But you do what you think looks good to your eye, okay? So yeah, I love it. All right, thanks for popping in, and I cannot wait to see your cherry blossoms. Okay, I'll see you guys later. Bye.